As a child, I didn't need friends because I had VHS tapes filled with cartoons. Classic MGM and Hanna-Barbera, American action cartoons, cartoons based off films and video games, obscure British, Canadian and Australian ones, bootleg tapes of all cartoons featuring creepy off-model illustrations, compilations of forgotten cartoons from the Great Depression in the Soviet Union, and shoddily dubbed anime. Speaking of anime, one of the tapes I had was this little oddity called Macron 1. To my knowledge, it was never broadcast on British TV, and this was the only time I ever saw Macron 1 since I found it in a charity shop rather than on a retail shelf. Watching this Macron 1 video didn't leave much of an impression on me other than its theme song and snippets that would pop into my head every once in a while. Which persisted into adulthood to the point where I got curious enough to look it up. What I found was that it was an English translation of a Japanese show called GoShogun, but not just an English translation. What do I mean by that? Well, before we get ahead of ourselves, what is GoShogun? GoShogun is an anime from 1981 about the Good Thunder team, who use a teleporting airship, sci-fi fighter jets, and a giant robot named GoShogun to combat a shadowy organization named Dokuga, who secretly control the world and send their own fighter jets, killer robots, and giant robots of their own to destroy the Good Thunder team. The Good Thunder team consists of the stoic and calculating Captain Sabarath, the serious and focused Shingo, Kili, who has a devil-may-care approach to life, Remy, who is the most nurturing of the team, Kenta, the typical rambunctious kid, and Ova, Kenta's robot tutor who acts as comic relief when paired as a double act with Kenta. The antagonists are led by Neo Neros, who commands the Dokuga Syndicate from the shadows along with his abettors, the elegant Leonardo Bundle, who has an obsession with beauty and is always waxing poetic, Kutnal, the wily and crafty general, the brutish Kurnagal, and a scientist named Dr. Jitter. When I first sat down to watch GoShogun, I looked at the first episode of its English dub, Macron 1, because when it comes to anime, I usually prefer to watch the dub rather than subtitles like I do when I watch live-action foreign language films, with a few exceptions. Fist of the North Star is an exception because its Japanese dub is so iconic. Imagine Fist of the North Star dubbed in Dutch. Yeah, bent, Al dude. While Dragon Ball The Magic Begins is best watched in its hokey English dub because it's funnier that way. Plus, they got Master Roshi down perfectly.
That was dirty. You fight dirty. You're no gentleman.
Ooh, but you're a sneaky little thief. You want to steal my magic cloud.
I just can't resist pretty girls like you!
Oh dear, what's gonna happen now?
Die!
However, what I found was that Macron 1 wasn't just an English dub of GoShogun, but a retooling of the series spliced in with a different anime called Mission Outer Space Srungle. That's right, they took episodes of two different anime series and spliced them together to make their own Frankenstein monster. They even edited scenes together to make it look like the characters from two different series were interacting with each other. They're not even shown in order. The first episode of Macron 1 includes scenes from both the first and the penultimate episode of GoShogun, and during action scenes plays top 40 hits from the time, including Everybody Wants to Rule the World by Tears for Fears, Out of Touch by Hall & Oates, and Hit Me With Your Best Shot by Pat Benatar. You'd almost expect the scenes to be heralded by Jimmy Savile. Watching Macron 1 was my introduction to the song Hit Me With Your Best Shot, which made me think it was originally made for it. I was 5, alright? So I thought, sod it, and watch the original Japanese version to get the proper experience. A lot of the episodes follow a formula where the Good Thunder team go somewhere and get attacked by the forces of Dokuga, where they have a tumble, resulting in their giant robot, the eponymous GoShogun, being deployed against an enemy giant robot. Though instead of 80s pop, when GoShogun shows up, this music plays that sounds like it's from Disco Stew's vinyl collection. And GoShogun shoots out of its crotch like Louis C.K. at a garden centre. Before I watched GoShogun, I hear that the series was supposed to be a self-aware parody of super robot anime, but I found that the series is actually pretty light on any parody or comedy, with most of the humour just coming from quips the characters make, and a couple of comic relief robot characters. Maybe for a mecha anime from the early 80s, having the characters snarkily banter with each other would have been enough to give it a comedy label, but I'm from Britain where half of our conversations are like that anyway. Without getting into spoilers, the closest GoShogun comes to a full-on comedy is the send-off it gives the characters at the very end of the series. But for me this fell flat since most of GoShogun is played straight as an action-adventure series rather than a straight-up comedy that parodies mecha anime the way Airplane parodies disaster films or LOLO parodied Secret Army. That's really the main issue I have with GoShogun, its lack of commitment. I'm not saying a series shouldn't blend things like drama and comedy because there are plenty of examples of that working beautifully, but the comedic send-off at the very end didn't work for me because there wasn't enough full-on comedy beforehand to warrant it. Especially after the dramatic episodes that went into Remy, Shingo and Killie's backstories, plus this one Seven Samurai inspired episode, which ends on the emotional highlight of the series, when Shingo chooses his duties over love. Just watch this scene. The more character-driven episodes were far and away the strongest parts of the series, and I like the distinct personalities of Bundle, Cutnell and Kernagel. How they try to increase their sphere of influence over the world through military might, subterfuge and control of the world's economies reminded me of XCOM, and made me wish there was a similar kind of game but with mechs. Then I realised there was one called Ring of Red, which I plan to play in the future on Twitch. Overall, GoShogun is a series that has its highlights for sure, but I wouldn't rate it as a must-watch anime, since it doesn't leave anywhere near as much of an impact as other mecha anime, such as Mobile Suit Gundam for example. So I can see why GoShogun has remained so obscure, and the most prominent part of its legacy is that one of the characters was a partial inspiration for James from Pokemon. I'm not joking, Takeshi Shuda worked on GoShogun, he was the original showrunner for the Pokemon anime. If you've ever wondered why you sometimes see James holding a rose, now you know. If you're thinking of checking out GoShogun, it's mercifully short, coming in at only 26 episodes. And by the end of it, I was left thinking that I'd watched a decent series, but it made me wonder if GoShogun could have benefited with some sort of follow-up that was more dramatic, character-driven, and amped up its weirder aspects. Oh wait. A few years after the series ended, a feature film follow-up was released called The Time Étranger, which took GoShogun in a drastically different direction. While the series had been a Saturday morning cartoon about fighting bad guys with a giant robot, The Time Étranger ditches the giant robots and lasers in favour of a surreal psychological thriller, with a cerebral script about a comatose Remy trying to escape from a Stygian plane of existence where she is fated to die. It features themes and subject matter of mortality, defiance of fate, childhood trauma, sexual assault and graphic violence. It's jarring seeing these characters who used to leap around in colourful jumpsuits and capes shooting laser guns now wearing realistic combat fatigues and using realistic weapons to mow down heaps of grey nightmare people, but it's the best kind of jarring because it's delivered with a strong script, stellar animation, striking imagery and music that amplifies the film's emotional gravity. So I was weirded out and I loved every moment of it. By the way, étranger is the French word for stranger, so I'm just going to keep calling it The Time Stranger for the rest of the video. In the 80s and 90s there was a trend of making family-friendly cartoons based off of live-action films made for an adult audience. Rambo, RoboCop and even The Toxic Avenger got their own Saturday morning cartoons. And The Time Stranger feels like the reverse of that, where they adapted a light robot show into an animated giallo film. Imagine if there was an Inspector Gadget movie with themes and a tone similar to Blade Runner. If you don't feel like watching 26 episodes of GoShogun, you can just watch The Time Stranger because the story is so removed from the series. That being said, watching the series first will give you a heightened sense of camaraderie between the characters because you'll have seen what they've gone through beforehand. There's also that how did it become like this novelty you can get from watching the series first. Kind of like the difference between Moral Oral Season 1 and Season 3. Also no Kento. While the series Shogun is alright but skippable, The Time Stranger is something I highly recommend. It's one of the most imaginative and introspective anime movies I've ever seen, and you're doing yourself a disservice by not watching it. On the list of top quality anime movies that get brought up, it's a scandal and a shame that you never hear about The Time Stranger. That's why I'm here to tell you about it. Silvio Berlusconi, the The whole time there's been the name of an ex-Italian Prime Minister on my Sonic video. You know Berlusconi had a bromance with Muammar Gaddafi? That must have been fun. Bunga bunga.